Says you'll be live soon. Hello, hello. I hope everyone's been enjoying the conference so far. I'm glad to be here. So we'll be chatting with the three awesome guests that I have before me on data strategy, team composition, maybe even the quintessential question of how do you name the different data roles out there. So I'll start with a quick introduction about myself and then ask each panelist to do the same. So my name is Srini, and I'll be acting as the host and moderator for this panel conversation. I currently lead developer relations at Preset, and before joining, I spent 7 years in data science and data education, mostly at startups. So the three panelists we have today hail from very different companies, and we're here to listen and learn from their lived experience. So yeah, I'd love to have everyone introduce themselves. So I'll start with Nikhil, since he's the first in my grid.
Hey everyone, Nikhil Gulati here. I'm excited to speak in this panel. I lead applied machine learning and engineering for Baker Hughes. And those who may not know Baker Hughes, we are one of the world's largest energy technology company working in oil and gas and LNG space. So excited to be here.
Great. We'll do Sarah next.
Sure. So I'm Sarah. I lead data engineering at PerPay. We're a fintech based in Philly, and before that, have spent some time in the larger financial space and manufacturing and SaaS as well, all analytics related, and do kind of technical writing and blogging on the side. So you might have seen me around elsewhere as well.
Awesome. And Disha.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Disha. I have been a practitioner of applied science and a leader in this space for over 12 years. I've worked in both enterprise settings as well as consumer device settings, product teams, and research teams in my career. My current role is in Cisco. I lead at the data science team. Our objective is to really improve customer experience and also provide insights for products. Prior to this experience, I worked at NEO in the autonomous driving space and Qualcomm before then in various capacities, but it's always been about data and data science. Excited to be here.
Awesome. Great. So we'll start with a little bit as a sarcastic softball question. But so I'm curious to get everyone's perspective here. Should a data team be centrally managed or more distributed? And maybe talk about the pros and kind of cons of each extreme based on the companies and company sizes that each of you have kind of had the opportunity to be a part of. So we'll go in reverse order. So I'll start with Disha this time.
Whoa, on the spot. When I think about this, I think about a 2x2 that comes to mind, right? I look at what is the data maturity of this company on one axis, if you will, and what impact can this drive for the business on the second axis. So for me, when I gauge about how to organize myself and the team around data, it's super important to understand that landscape. In my specific experience, if you're medium on both, meaning you have enough data to work with, you validated that, and you're fairly mature on the data front, and you know how to apply it to business. If you've answered those two questions as a company, uh, in my experience, what's worked is a hub and spoke kind of model. So it's a hybrid. It's not completely central, right? The functions that I think could become central, right, are the platforms and data piece, because there is enough maturity to warrant like a central team having these different spokes and different product orgs where data scientists could reside. So that's been my experience. That's what worked for me if I think about the problem in that space. Caveat being, this works when you have some visibility on your data landscape and some understanding of how you'll use data for the business. Let's talk about a different example where you don't know both, right? You are very early in your data journey as a company. I think a good setup there would be to be embedded inside a product org, because you will get the best and first-hand understanding around the business problems. So you can actually scrape that as you go while you show your credibility applied to business, do end-to-end in a small setting, and then go central when you mature. So that's just my strategy when I think about it. I'd love to hear from everyone else.
Yeah, we'll go to Sarah next.
Sure. Yeah, I'll kind of bounce off of the hybrid model that Disha said. Totally agree that it depends on the maturity of the organization, but also the size. So, having been the first data hire in the past, obviously by definition, if there's only one data person, right, that's centralized. But as the organization matures and gets bigger, I think the centralization eventually, right, there's going to be so much domain expertise and so much just business context that needs to be built, that might be really, really difficult to maintain within one central team. But at the same time, you don't want to I don't think that you would want to necessarily decentralize everything because, as Nisha mentioned, right, the data platform, you don't want everyone having to repeat the process of getting data from raw systems just to get it in one place to be able to analyze it, right? If we could centralize that, then we could save time for a lot of people, save time and money. And so I think that centralization, it really varies depending on the size of the company. And early on, I think there's a lot of benefits of centralization. And then later, right, there's kind of this threshold where a company might mature out of that and just get too big to support that level of centralization.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's almost before, real quick before we go to Nikhil, it seems like maybe the infrastructure gets centralized, since that's maybe not worth repeating, but the kind of modeling, the insights, some of the domain expertise maybe lives in each of the teams. I'm curious, kind of, Nikhil, what you would add to that, or maybe even contradict that summary.
Yeah, I'm pretty aligned on the last comment, but I will say that the things have been evolving in my experience, especially in the enterprise setting, especially B2B to C. I mean, traditionally we have seen all the old companies which are adopting these new technologies and wants data to support that. It's about, hey, let's go with a data strategy, start centrally, and then go towards this hub and spoke model that Disha mentioned. But my experience now tells me that it also get influenced by how mature your own customers are. So an enterprise needs to know how, where does the strategy for the customer they're going to serve land. And what I have found is that if your business has different product lines or sub business units, what works is when you actually build products which are going to be driven by machine learning and data, then decentralized model so far in my experience works best. But again, back to infrastructure, I think infrastructure makes sense to be centrally driven, and that's not necessarily the data team. That could be more engineering focused that serves the purpose for each of those business. There are certain specialities that you may encounter that that central infrastructure does not support everyone. But typically, I think that's where the field, in my mind, or the companies are moving. Very focused data scientists for business because the business context is important, and then the infrastructure is somewhat central.
Interesting. I think I'm also hearing that maybe, is there a nuance around projects that need a lot of machine learning versus kind of more analytics, reporting, kind of, counting things to, in the broadest sense? Like, I'm curious how the people here think about maybe the differences around implementation and even org structure when it comes to machine learning, which is still, I think everyone's still figuring out how to actually deploy usefully.
I can take a stab there. I think if your product, let's think something around speech, right? If you really need to crack that problem, you probably need domain experts because it's a big area that's growing, right? So you want to build a team that definitely involves specialists in that domain, right? To me, that's a very specialized way of designing the team where you have a lot of researchers and applied scientists trying to solve a very specific business problem. Um, on the contrary, you could be in a consulting mode where the business problems are spread. It's more analytics driving metrics, and people come to you with their data problems and their data SMEs. You solve it for them. So I see these two modes of operation depending on who I'm working with in my experience.
Yeah, that's a good point, and I'd like to just add there. I think there is a different dimension of domain, especially from my perspective here in oil and gas. There's a domain which is specific to machine learning, speech,
Yeah.
NLP, computer vision, but there's a domain that we have to understand, just traditional domains. So we are trying to bring machine learning and AI to oil and gas industry. So there are already people who knows a lot about the oil and gas domain, what data we get from these processes and systems. So we have to include that expertise with the machine learning domain expertise, and figure out that what's the right team or what's the skill set, so that we can jointly build a product which is going to be valuable for our customer. So there's another angle that generally comes into picture depending on which industry you are in. Even in like things, companies like Amazon, there were
Yeah.
early on a lot of people who were specialists in supply chain, and then they were merged with people who will understand machine learning, and then solutions were built from that standpoint.
Yeah, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach here. I think that honestly, even data science aside, I think even in the reporting side, I think there's a lot of domain expertise, and I don't even it's not even limited to, is it manufacturing or marketing or something else. I think that even within the realm of data, for
Yeah.
example, right, you take web analytics, right? So if you take any sort of like for event data, right? Knowing that if someone has an ad blocker, that event data isn't going to exist for that person. That's an important piece of context to just understanding what the data means, even whether it's right web data on a marketing website or something else. And so I think that having that context is important for consistency between the analyst or the person looking at the data to the actual business user making a decision off of that information, whether it be product trying to influence a user experience or whether it be marketing in terms of understanding what campaigns or ads are working better or worse. But I think that having some sort of consistency there is really important to be able to make sure that the data is being interpreted in a way that makes sense within the context.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm curious, Disha, Nikhil, if you guys have anything else to add to Sarah's comment there.
I think I'm good. Thank you.
Agree.
Cool. Yeah, so we'll switch gears just a little bit. I mean, I'm curious to, we have a kind of a nice diverse set of organizations, scales especially represented. So what does kind of a medium to large scale data project, like how is that actually initiated in your respective companies? What is the life cycle like, the different stages? And, I think importantly, what roles are actually involved in that whole life cycle? So I'll start with Nikhil this time.
Yeah, sure. My team specifically is purely customer focused. So we start with typically understanding the use cases that our customer have, and then map them to the product portfolio or any other solutions that we want to build for them. So typically, from in that scenario, you need a data scientist who understands the domain, who can work with the subject matter expertise from the customer or from our side, and then that typically involves few weeks to a month time to really nail down the use case and understand the data landscape. Disha mentioned a little bit about data landscape, and as I was saying, it depends on what your customer has. So you may have some data, but you need data from the customer. And then as we progress through that, I think then the whole implementation piece is typically around anywhere from 3 months to 6 months. And then we bring in the broader team where you have developers, solution architects, machine learning engineers, some data scientists who can focus on that domain. And it evolves from there to full production environment and deployment. Then you go into ML ops. So slightly the skill set changed there, although the lines are being blurred, as we progress. So same guy can be in the beginning of the project, but now he's actually towards the end of the project, and we don't necessarily need two people for doing that. So typically, it's, as I said, it starts from understanding the needs of the customer, mapping to a product solution, implementing, and 6 months timeline. Typically, that's my project timeline. For anything R&D related, that's longer. 8 months, 9 months, 1 year, and completely different set of people, though some similar skill sets.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sarah, I'd love to get kind of your take.
Yeah, so I think from the perspective of a smaller organization, I mean, for context, PerPay is under 50 people. My last organization was under 40. It's what I've seen in those kind of smaller but mid-size startup within the startup size range. At those companies, it really varies, and it's really split between suggestions coming from the analytics team. So people who spend a lot of time in the data, who look at it in different ways, who talk to stakeholders, and these people could be more on the strategic analytics side or the analytics engineering side to kind of make recommendations about maybe how the product could change, or a different visual to look at to be able to drive some sort of decision. That compared with initiatives coming from different business units. So whether it be from marketing trying to launch an A/B test between two different campaigns and wanting to understand which one works better. I mean, I think I've used that example in the past, but I think it's a pretty straightforward one in terms of, right, one team wanting to optimize kind of their metrics in terms of how many people click on ads, and lowering the cost per click, or whatever the metrics are that are important. And so I think that depending on where the request comes from, there are different people that are kind of involved. If in my experience, if the request comes from external, outside, I mean, internal to the organization, but outside of the analytics team, it'll be a lot of the kind of analyst, strategic analyst person, as well as kind of data engineering involved to bring that, report or comparison, or bring that data to life and kind of tie it to the business. If it comes from the internal team, because there's a lot of kind of digging, and it might be a more kind of R&D focused, as like Nikhil said, that usually involves data science, just because, as opposed to my team, data engineering, it's very much like, let's project focus, let's get from A to B and kind of build something out, as opposed to digging around in the data. So definitely depends there, but I will say the one constant is having kind of an analytics, engineering, and strategic analytics side to it, to basically tie, right, okay, so now we build a report, we build some sort of data products to be able to explain that and tie it to the actual question that the business stakeholder is trying to answer.
Got it. And lastly, Disha.
Well, I may sound repetitive. I agree with most of what I've heard here, but I'll just summarize like my viewpoint in two parts. The personas and the skill sets, I think, that are key tenets of making any data product come to a successful ending. I think would involve data engineering heavily, right? Like, we need somebody to understand the data. They're specialists in moving data, combining it, sourcing it, whatnot, right? It's fundamental. So I see a data engineer playing a very, very key role there. um, I do see data scientists as personas that are definitely needed. The way I look at that role is trying to find meaning out of this data, bringing more definition, cleaning, quality, all those pieces, right? Having comments there and having point of views on what did you learn from it. A very important role for me when I think about data teams is product managers. I think they are that bridge between business and these technical teams that I think I cannot emphasize enough. I think their role is really to bring these meaty business problems that people care about, that consumers care about, to these teams that are highly focused in these special areas, right? Like finding the right data and building the science around it. I do also want to say program managers keeps everybody honest. So it's a persona I really like working with in data teams. There are lots of moving parts, right? I think that definitely adds efficiency. So I see all of these as key people in the data teams. What does a life cycle look like for us, for example, right? In some of my experiences, I think the early phase is where you want to gather requirements. So I feel like the PMs and data scientists, data engineers all play a big role there in interfacing with customers, knowing the requirements. I typically call it a gate. I call it a gate zero for any project. The next phase in my mind is logically digging deeper on the data. Can the data answer the questions we've heard that customers care about? So that is the data discovery phase, as I say. And the third piece, once you've really figured out the business problem, there's enough data supporting some analysis or questions that can be solved using the data. With that validation, I think you move into full-fledged science development. So meaning, go get the insights, do the modeling, all build the bells and whistles, and then talk about deployment. That's where ML ops, I think, Nikhil, you brought that up. That to me is the next gate, where you talk about deployment, talk about scale. I think a lot of people stop there, but I think the next two blocks in my mind are integrating this solution into the business. And the very final is me getting feedback from the business. So think A/B test, think about embedding yourself temporarily into a business, making sure they're using and adopting the model in the right way, and then using that feedback to create this next version. So that to me is a full life cycle. And this is iterative, right? Needless to say, this is a loop that we run in.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And actually, Andrew, in the Q&A, it looks like we do have Q&A, had a great question around kind of, he mentioned in his organization that people are comfortable with the different roles that everyone plays: data engineering, data science, analysis, engineering, software engineering, and they work together well. But it seems like there's still linking tools that are missing in their view. So it looks like he's especially interested in larger organizations. Do you all agree? Like, what are the kind of maybe current tools and techniques that y'all use to kind of manage these large projects where people speak different tools, different languages, and think in different ways? Whoever wants to start can start.
I'll kind of jump in initially. I think one point that Disha mentioned, which I think is a really important one, is having some sort of program manager or project leader or data product manager or some role of that nature. I think one of the reasons for that role existing is now that there's so many different types of data roles, be it data science, ML ops, data engineering, data ops, data analyst, strategic analyst, like the list kind of goes on.
Yeah.
To be able to pull on those different strings at different times and be able to link them together, right? And that's not even talking about, linking analytics to software engineering, as Andrew mentioned in the question. And so I think that is incredibly important, because those links, right? If there is any miscommunication, it's going to happen between teams, right? That's kind of the biggest area for potential for miscommunication. And so having someone that's kind of looking at that at a high level, to me, I kind of relate it to products management in more traditional, like software engineering flows. The product manager sits between a software engineering team and either the consumer or the internal business user, whoever it may be, but they're kind of the overarching person that makes sure that, first of all, timelines are kind of kept and expectations are kept. And then second, making sure that communication happens and making sure that everyone's on the same page. And I think that same thing is extremely important when talking about analytics as well, because we do want to kind of treat outputs as products, and it takes multiple people to get there.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I think there are two parts to it. One is almost influenced by the maturity of your organization. I think definitely you need someone who needs to program manage it or project lead the project and make sure that all the organizations and all the people from different organizations are working in a cohesive manner. But there's another notion to it. I think personally, as some of these roles are no longer, they're not different orgs anymore. Machine learning and software engineering are almost depending on the maturity of your organization, it's the same thing, right? So the tools are also now same. Back in the days, we would have a data scientist using Jupyter notebooks and those tools, and then there'd be a separate software engineering team who would actually take that code, figure out what to do with that, and deploy it. I don't see that anymore. We use platforms either from vendors or inbuilt, where a data scientist, machine learning guy can directly write code, deploy it, know different lines. So I think the linking is already happening depending on, again, the skill sets that you are taking on with your team. Similar things happen with full stack engineers back in the day. There used to be a UI guy and there used to be a backend guy. Then came the full stack software engineer, and then the tools started to converge there, and he has one development environment and all the tools available to him to do the job. So that linking become more like, instead of linking, it become a infrastructure or a platform that serves different types of skills. And that's where I'm seeing the trend is moving, where there's almost like one platform to serve every different segment, and you don't necessarily link tools anymore. They are just part of this one bundle. If that's what linking means, then yes.
Yeah. Anything else you add, Disha? Or you pretty much agree.
Yeah, I was just thinking about what linking really meant here. I'll make an assumption. I think what the question really asks for is every role in the data org is doing their portion, and I think just coordinating between these roles is what I think is the link. If we have a people throw a person at the problem, that would look something like a PM managing the program. So we touched upon that. But a different view would be are they tools available to track a project's life cycle, for example, right? I've not run across that. Let's say my goal is to deliver some kind of a product with this kind of performance, right? Is there common tools that anybody who's working on the project can go and see where things are? Are they pipelines being built by data engineers, or how many models have been tried? Just like you have model catalogs, version control, is there something at a program level that exists? I've not come across it. I want to acknowledge that definitely the linking is, in my experience, being humans like us trying to really connect all the dots for everyone in either business reviews or scrum meetings and the like. So hopefully
Yeah.
I understand the
Yeah.
question. I think
So, Andrew, if you want to start a company, I think this is the idea. This is the next company that needs to solve this problem. Go ahead, Nikhil.
Yeah, I think it's about, again, linking or merging project management tools for the life cycle of machine learning and data science, bringing together one single pane of glass for the project managers and the whole team
Yeah,
to understand how all these pieces are progressing.
for sure. Cool. So we have a few more minutes. So the last question I wanted to make sure I know someone here touched on vendors. So how do y'all see vendors and managed service providers as an extension of your team? How do they fit into your life cycle? And how does that view maybe changes as as the project gets to completion? So we'll start with Sarah, I guess this time.
Sure. I think if we talk about a project's life cycle, right, in the beginning, there's always the, build versus buy question. Are you going to ask someone on your team to build something, or are you going to go look out for a vendor to solve that problem? And I think that is really where to start. And right in the assessing vendors, and I recently spoke on a panel regarding that specifically, so I won't go too far into that. But I think that if you if you bring on vendors onto a project, I think that managing how the vendor is performing and what you're paying how the tool is performing, what you're trying to have it do, and making sure that there's alerting set up to make sure that it integrates well with the rest of the project and make sure that someone's kind of on top of it. And I think as the project kind of continues and completes, there's going to, I think, before it truly is done, assessing what is the maintenance needed for this project to continue, right? Something might change 6 months down the line. Who's going to be the person to change a configuration, or to, something broke, right? Who's going to fix it? And so to make sure that there's an understanding of what the maintenance is, who's going to be involved. And I think that's where more of the project manager, product manager comes in, and communication is really key there. But also to be able to assess whether you want to stay with the vendor, either move to an in-house solution, or maybe change vendors, right, if the scope of the project changed even after its completion. So I think maybe the short answer is, like, a project is never fully done. There's always a little bit of a tail.
And then maybe Disha, you want to chime in after?
sure. In my view, I see when there's vendor selection, when there's services we get from professionals who've kind of built products around data outside of the team, I see them as extended pieces of my own team. I think the kinds of problems I look at are in two buckets. If I have a very well defined problem where I know the solution is out there and I just don't have the budget or the bandwidth to support it internally, um, I definitely see vendors as being people I reach out to and work with to achieve those goals, right? So they're very much part of my team. I think there's, in terms of logistics, you want a lead data scientist or a lead data engineer leading that effort. So there's full communication between the vendor progress and where we want to take it, just so that there are no gaps. I think the second bucket of problems are in the space of if there's innovative research that needs to happen, especially on the platforms pieces, right? Like that's a hugely evolving space. I think bringing in vendors who specialize at certain data platforms, ML platforms, learning from them, and giving them pilots, working closely with them has helped us a lot. So I think that's a partnership role on things that we want to learn and use their help as an advantage. They're not anymore filling the bandwidth gap, but they're filling the knowledge gap that we have on platforms. So I've worked on vendors in both capacities.
I'll jump in here quickly. There are two scenarios we use: partners or vendors. One is, we talk about that a little bit. When you're towards the end of your project or deploying your product, you have to do integration with customer systems. So we use system integrators to take that sort of last mile approach. Some of those are cookie cutter jobs of integrating pipelines. One risk there is managing technical debt. How do you make sure that your partner or vendor is building a solution that tomorrow when you change something, it's easily changeable there. So that's something to look out for. The second piece is actually more important to us. We have global customers, and there's a regional reach that we need. So sometimes it's not easy for us to go and hire a team within that region because there's a cultural context. And then there's also sometimes in cases language context, even though, we do localization for our products, but we need sometimes a customer facing front focused team where we would lead it, but we need local resources. So sometimes you can go to a vendor these days, actually, good thing is in a lot of the regions, boutique consulting firms are coming up as vendors and services providers. So they can provide those local resources. So I think in those cases, we get global reach without actually spending 6 months of hiring cycle to set up that team and train them.
Awesome. Makes sense. Well, thanks for sticking around. I know we are technically right a little bit over time. So thanks everyone for the great conversation. It's great to meet the three of you as well. I hope the audience enjoyed this conversation. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.